Welcome to the debate. Right now, nearly 50% of marriages end in a legally adversarial, frankly, financially devastating divorce.
Yeah, it's a pretty staggering statistic when you actually look at it.
It really is. And, it forces us to ask a profound question, one that is raised directly by today's source material. Is the lifelong institution of marriage still the ultimate anchor for societal stability? Or has it become a dangerous, outdated legal contract?
Right, we are looking at a very stark dividing line drawn straight through modern society here.
Exactly. And I hold the position that marriage remains a foundational, lifelong institution. I mean, it is a necessary structure prioritizing social stability, providing deeply predictable environments for children, and, offering crucial economic and psychological security precisely because it is so difficult to dissolve.
Well, and I take the position that this structure has basically outlived its utility. I argue that marriage operates today largely as an outdated contract that, it actively stifles individual autonomy.
I see.
Yeah, because modern fulfillment is found in evolving family structures. And it really requires untying our happiness from formal, government validation.
Right. So I often look at this tension as a question of structural architecture. I mean, are we debating the necessity of a heavy anchor that provides vital stability to a ship in a storm? Or, to your point, are we questioning why modern vessels are still burdened by dead weight when they're explicitly built for speed and flexibility?
That is exactly the question.
And I believe we absolutely need that anchor. To begin laying out the framework of my position, we have to look at the primary value of the institution, which is commitment and stability.
Okay.
The foundational logic of a lifelong marriage isn't that two people will simply remain the exact same individuals they were on their wedding day. I mean, no one expects that. The logic is that growth happens specifically through overcoming challenges together.
Right.
And the permanence of the vow is what fundamentally changes the nature of the relationship. It removes the easy exit strategy. And by doing that, it forces a much deeper level of problem solving.
I come at it from a different way. The primary values of modern relationships have shifted toward autonomy and flexibility, and honestly, for very good reason.
You think so?
I do. Because personal growth is highly dynamic. The idea that you can make a promise at, say, age 25 that perfectly accommodates the person you will become at age 55 completely ignores the reality of psychological development over a lifespan.
But doesn't that assume people grow apart by default? What if the institution itself is the scaffolding that ensures they grow in tandem?
Scaffolding can easily become a cage, though.
Well, it makes me wonder, can true emotional safety and deep, authentic vulnerability even exist without the permanent vow that marriage demands? I mean, if the door is always left slightly ajar, can you ever fully let your guard down?
Wait, I'm losing your logic here. You're saying making it incredibly expensive and, legally perilous to leave someone is what creates emotional safety?
I wouldn't phrase it that way, but...
I mean, that sounds like a hostage situation, not a partnership. The emotional safety you're talking about shouldn't be derived from the fact that someone is legally trapped in a house with you.
Okay, that's a bit hyperbolic.
Is it? It should be derived from the fact that they wake up every single day and actively choose to be there.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. You are characterizing it as being legally trapped, but I call it mandatory friction.
Mandatory friction. Okay.
Yes. When you hit a crisis in a relationship, and every relationship hits them, right? That mandatory friction stops you from making a rash, emotionally charged exit. It literally forces you to sit down at the table and negotiate.
But we have to look at how that actually plays out in the real world. When the primary glue holding two people together is a government contract rather than mutual, ongoing personal alignment, you aren't fostering vulnerability. You are fostering complacency.
I disagree.
People stop trying precisely because the exit cost is too high. Instead, I look at modern relationship dynamics through the lens of what we might call serial compatibility.
Serial compatibility?
Yeah, an individual can easily outgrow a single partnership over several decades, not out of malice or failure, but just through natural human evolution. We have to untie the concept of happiness and commitment from a lifelong legal status.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it very differently. Complacency implies a lack of effort, whereas I view the institution as the exact mechanism that demands effort when initial motivation or, romantic infatuation naturally wanes.
But it demands effort through coercion.
No, through structure. But if we move from these theoretical definitions of freedom and commitment, we really have to look at the practical impact on society. The source material draws heavily on historical and sociological studies demonstrating that married households provide highly predictable environments for childhood development.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that.
Really? The data's pretty robust.
Let me tell you why. That reliance on historical studies looks at a snapshot of a society where marriage was a monopoly. I mean, it was the only socially and economically acceptable option for raising children.
Well, sure, historically speaking.
So, of course, it provided the baseline. There was no alternative allowed to exist.
But the mechanism of that baseline matters. The stability of the marital institution ripples outward. It creates a reliable center of gravity, not just for the couple, but for the dependents and the extended community that rely on that household's permanence.
And I argue that modern diverse family structures have successfully replaced that traditional model with something far more resilient.
Like what, exactly?
Well, we are seeing incredible fulfillment in long-term cohabitation, in chosen families, and in cooperative single parenting. These structures offer deeply loving, stable environments for children without needing formal government validation.
I'm not denying there is love there, but
The assumption that predictability only comes from a marriage license completely ignores a glaring reality. A highly toxic, high-conflict marriage provides a deeply unpredictable and damaging environment for a child.
well, nobody is defending a toxic marriage.
Right.
Whereas a peaceful cohabiting couple or a robust network of a chosen family can provide absolute consistency.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because it completely sidesteps the structural weakness of those alternatives. Let's dig into this idea of the chosen family or non-binding cohabitation as a one-to-one replacement.
Okay, let's do it.
Doesn't the very nature of a non-legally binding structure lack that mandatory friction I mentioned earlier? In a marriage, if you have a terrible fundamental disagreement about, say, finances or parenting styles, the high cost of exit means you can't just walk away.
Right, you're stuck.
You are forced to rebuild. Without that legal and financial tether, isn't the structural integrity of the household entirely dependent on the daily emotional weather of the adults?
Not at all. And here is how the mechanism of a chosen family actually works in practice. A traditional nuclear marriage is a single point of failure.
A single point of failure?
Exactly. If the marriage breaks, the entire household structure collapses. The child's world is shattered. A chosen family, or a deeply integrated cohabiting community, operates more like a distributed network.
I see where you're going, but
Caregiving, emotional support, and even financial pooling are spread across multiple committed adults. If one node in that network fails, like if two adults in that community decide their romantic relationship has run its course, the network survives.
assuming the network is perfectly functional.
The child still has a stable environment. The friction is resolved because the individuals value the network enough to do the work, not because a judge and a mountain of legal paperwork make leaving too expensive.
But that psychological safety net you're describing in a network still requires ultimate commitment from somewhere, which brings us to the psychological mechanisms at play for the individuals involved.
Okay.
The emotional focus of marriage is uniquely centered on mutual support through life's hardest moments. Let's look at attachment theory. A permanent vow fosters a deeper vulnerability precisely because it provides a secure base.
A secure base, sure, in theory.
Not just in theory. When you know the other person has sworn a permanent vow, you actually have the psychological security to fail. You can become ill. You can lose your job or undergo a severe personal crisis.
But
without the looming threat that your partner will decide this iteration of you no longer serves their serial compatibility.
that's a compelling argument. But have you considered how often that secure base curdles into a suffocating environment where neither person is actually allowed to evolve?
I think that's a mischaracterization of evolution.
Is it? Staying in a marriage purely for the sake of the vow, especially when partners have fundamentally changed their core values over 20 years, doesn't create emotional safety. It creates profound stagnation.
Well, if they stop communicating, sure.
If my partner's security relies on me freezing my personal development so that I don't disrupt our original dynamic, that isn't mutual support. That is literally an anchor dragging the ship down.
I see why you say that, but I think your definition of personal development in this context might actually just be conflict avoidance masked as self-actualization.
Wow. Conflict avoidance?
Yes, exactly. The language of outgrowing a partnership implies a really passive consumption of the relationship. It treats a partnership like you are outgrowing a pair of shoes. But a marriage isn't a consumer good. It's a collaborative creation.
I wouldn't call recognizing a fundamental shift in values consumerism. I call it having the autonomy to recognize when a structural dynamic is actively causing harm or has simply run its course.
But true psychological evolution is largely impossible without the constraints of a permanent commitment. When you hit that wall where you feel you have outgrown the partnership, the constraint of the vow forces you to turn inward.
Or it forces you to become deeply resentful.
It forces you to communicate and to evolve together. The limitation is the exact mechanism that forces the innovation. If you can just pack up and leave the moment you feel stifled, you never actually do the hardest psychological work of all.
Which is?
Integrating your changing, flawed self with another changing, flawed human being.
But you were speaking about marriage as if it's purely a theoretical exercise in mutual evolution. We have to look at the realities of how this contract operates in the material world.
I am looking at the material world.
And if you feel emotionally trapped, that affects your wallet too. This psychological stagnation has a very real price tag, which brings us to the financial and legal mechanisms of this institution. You argue for marriage as an economic safety net, but I view it as a highly dangerous, totally unnecessary legal and financial entanglement.
It is absolutely an essential economic safety net. Look at the data. Marriage acts as a massive economic shield.
For some, maybe.
The institution provides tangible, structural benefits that cohabiting couples simply do not get by default. Legal next-of-kin status in medical emergencies, massive tax benefits, survivorship rights, and a highly structured framework for shared wealth building.
But you are only looking at the best-case scenario of that economic unit. You have to evaluate a contract based on what happens when it breaks down.
Even when it breaks down, the contract guarantees equity.
Equity? Seriously?
Think about how this works mechanically. If one partner takes on the unpaid labor, say, stepping back from their career for 5 years to raise children or manage the home, the marriage contract ensures they are legally entitled to the wealth being generated by the partner in the workforce. Without marriage, that unpaid labor is a catastrophic financial risk.
If you're listening to this and you've been through a brutal divorce, you're probably shaking your head at this idea of seamless wealth building and equity.
Well, obviously it's not seamless.
Right. But the severe risks of this legal entanglement are undeniable. When marriages end, the divorce process is structurally designed to be legally adversarial. The very wealth you claim the institution helps build is frequently decimated by the legal fees, the courts, and the asset division required to dissolve the contract.
That's a feature of a complex uncoupling, not a flaw of the initial protection.
Why should modern couples subject themselves to such catastrophic legal risks just to build a life together?
Because the risk validates the reward. Refusing the economic safety net of marriage simply because divorce is financially devastating is exactly like refusing to invest in the stock market because market crashes occur.
Wait, what?
Hear me out. Yes, the dissolution of the asset is incredibly painful. But doesn't the risk of a legally adversarial divorce actually underscore the sheer power of the shared wealth-building protections the institution provides in the first place?
I don't follow that at all. How does the destruction of wealth prove its value?
Because the reason divorce is so complex and financially weighty is precisely because the marriage contract successfully merged two individual lives into a highly integrated, deeply invested single entity.
Okay, but
The severity of the unwinding process is just proof of how robust the weaving was. If it were easy to walk away financially, it would mean there was no real economic safety net to begin with. The legal protections you view as a threat are the exact mechanisms that protect the vulnerable partner from being left with nothing after 20 years of sacrifice.
That stock market analogy assumes the potential yield is worth the catastrophic risk of a crash. But let's look at the actual mechanisms of modern finance and society. The historical necessity of that robust weaving you're talking about was based on a society where women, in particular, were economically disenfranchised by default.
Sure, historically.
They needed the contract because they were barred from the primary labor market. Today, individuals have their own access to the labor market, their own ability to build wealth, and their own agency.
But the wealth gap between a primary caregiver and a primary earner still exists, regardless of gender. How do your evolving family structures handle that without the family court system enforcing fairness?
By using functional, specific legal instruments rather than a blanket, archaic government contract.
Like what?
Well, cohabiting couples can pool resources and share living expenses using modern tools. They can draw up specific trusts, maintain separate asset management, and establish clear, contractual boundaries from the start that just don't require the family court system to arbitrate.
That sounds exhausting to manage.
This is a much safer mechanism. It allows individuals to build their own economic safety nets without legally tying their retirement accounts to another person's potentially shifting behavior over 40 years.
But doesn't that inherently make the relationship transactional from day one?
No, it makes it clear and communicative from day one. The adversarial nature of divorce doesn't just destroy finances, it destroys the residual goodwill between the partners. That is devastating if they have children.
I don't disagree that a hostile divorce is damaging.
Rather than turning former partners into legal combatants who are incentivized by their lawyers to destroy each other.
Well, it seems we have reached the core of our divergence here. To summarize where my position stands in light of this discussion, I maintain that the permanent vow of marriage remains an unparalleled foundational institution.
Right.
It provides true psychological security by removing the constant threat of abandonment, offering a secure base from which to navigate life's inevitable crises. Furthermore, it creates the mandatory friction necessary to build predictable childhood environments. And mechanically, it serves as a powerful economic safety net that protects both individuals through the pooling of resources and, crucially, the legal recognition of unpaid labor.
Even if it risks total financial ruin at the end.
Yes, because the gravity of the commitment, the sheer difficulty of unwinding it, is exactly what produces its profound societal and personal benefits.
And my position remains that the modern era requires a structural shift toward autonomy. We have to recognize that marriage operates today as an outdated contract that frequently stifles the dynamic nature of human psychological development.
Even though I think that development requires constraints.
Rather than relying on a single point of failure, evolving norms like cohabitation, chosen families, and distributed networks of care provide all the necessary environments for love and support, and they do so using modern mechanisms that avoid unnecessary adversarial legal entanglements with the state. True fulfillment comes from authentic personal growth over decades.
Sure.
That is best supported by flexibility and the freedom to choose your partnerships actively, every single day, without relying on a rigid government contract to enforce loyalty.
Yet, despite our stark differences in the mechanism, I think it is clear from the source material and our exchange that we actually share the exact same ultimate goal. Both of our perspectives are deeply concerned with facilitating genuine human happiness.
Absolutely. We definitely agree on that.
We both want structures that provide emotional support through hardships, and we both prioritize creating a secure, nurturing environment for personal growth and for raising children.
We simply disagree on whether a binding legal institution or individual flexibility is the best vehicle to reach that destination.
I agree entirely. We are both looking at the exact same human needs: security, love, support, and growth. The disagreement is structural.
If we move away from metaphors of ships and anchors, it's really about organizational models.
Right.
Is the best environment for human flourishing a jointly owned corporate entity where assets and liabilities are completely merged and difficult to untangle? Or is it a freelance collaboration where individuals come together by choice, maintain their own autonomy, and stay only as long as the project serves both parties?
A freelance collaboration. That's a very modern way to put it.
Both models have risks, and both have undeniable benefits depending on the individuals involved.
It reflects a fundamental human paradox, really. We are looking at our simultaneously, intensely conflicting desires for both absolute security and absolute freedom. We want the unwavering guarantee that someone will be there to catch us when we fall, but, we also want the unencumbered freedom to reinvent ourselves whenever we choose.
Exactly. You can't maximize both perfectly.
No, you can't. How modern society will continue to balance this tension between social stability and individual autonomy is a massive question, and the source material leaves much more to explore on the horizon. Thank you for joining us for this exchange of ideas, and we leave you to consider which structure best supports the life you are trying to build.